Welcome to Ghost Carrier, our 15-part alternative history audio series about a world where America lost the Pacific War. This is the tale of a doomed aircraft carrier and its crew, stranded in the vast Pacific by a supernatural twist of fate. This story has been adapted from my book, Ghost Carrier. You can purchase the full version in paperback, Kindle, or audiobook from the links in this episode's description. I'm Robert Child, and Episode 9 will begin in a moment. Summer is a great time for catching up on military history, and my book about the 7 Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, Immortal Valor, has just been released in paperback. Immortal Valor chronicles these timeless heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you pick up the new paperback version, hardcover or audiobook, available in stores and online.
Ghost Carrier, They Died to Fight Another Day. Written by Robert Child. Narrated by Kirk Winkler. USS Liscum Bay, Motion Picture Projection Room, 1800 hours. Admiral Mullinex concluded his opening blessing during the regular Wednesday night meeting of the Dead Man's Club as usual, saying, "Give us the strength to put one foot in front of the other each day, and let us never, ever, ever forget who we truly are and where we really come from. Amen." "Amen," the men responded in unison. "Okay, war report," Mullinex said as he picked up a manila folder and continued. "Not much has changed in the situation. In fact, nothing has changed in our orders to attack the Japanese mainland. Admiral?" The admiral, not used to being interrupted, frowned and turned to look at Joe. "Yes, Seaman Rusk?" "Permission to speak, sir?" "Always, sailor, but I was in the middle of the war report." "Yes, sir, it's about that." Mullinex shrugged and brought his manila folder down and nodded to Rusk. "What is it?" Joe's eyes scanned across the room a moment while he gathered his courage. "Sir, it's just that I've been talking to some of the guys, and, sir, respectfully, we should just deep six these orders. The war's back in California, not here." Mullinex nodded and continued to listen, knowing Joe had more to say. "I mean, we went down fighting in the old world, and we got a score to settle with these Japs." "And you don't think attacking Japan is fighting back?" No, sir, I don't, and you said it yourself, it's a suicide mission. If I'm going to die again, I want to go down fightin'." Other men voiced agreement. Fellas, I know how you feel. I've been working on this, trying to come up with a plan. I've slowed task force speed below 10 knots, which hasn't gone unnoticed by command. I'd been hoping they'd come to their goddamn senses and recall us, send us to San Diego or Pearl where we could do some damage. No dice. 2 hours ago they radioed a request to double our speed west. "Bullshit!" An unidentified sailor in the back expressed his frustration. "That's right, sailor, it is bullshit. I'm shit-canning the request. But we're between a rock and a hard place, boys, and near as I can tell, we're the only American task force left in the Central Pacific. There has been 0 radio traffic from any other Allied ship within 1,000 miles. We're it." Men hung their heads, hearing the situation was near hopeless. No support, no way to get back home, and ordered on a suicide mission to Japan. Not a soul in the Dead Man's Club that night could fathom how their situation could possibly get any worse. They could not have been more wrong. USS Liscum Bay, Radar Room. The freckle-faced 18-year-old radar man, Bobby Cannon, had just started his early morning shift. It was 0400 hours, and he was still wiping sleep from his eyes when the formation appeared on his circular green PPI radar scope. Massive wasn't the right word. No, Bobby thought as he felt an ominous feeling creep into his body. Gigantic was more like it. "Jesus," Bobby whispered to himself as a swarm of green dots bearing southeast covered the upper left quadrant of his radar scope. "Sir, sir!" Bobby turned around and shouted to the officer on duty. "I've got 12 to 16 ships, 121,000 yards to the northwest, bearing 40 degrees. Lon Turner, the fire control officer that morning, rushed to the scope to confirm. His horrified face reflected in the glass as he counted. 16, 17, 18. Speed? 22 knots, sir. They're on a heading straight for us. Friend or foe? Too far out for SG, sir. Okay, we're not taking any chances. Turner grabbed the receiver that was the direct line to the captain on the bridge. Captain Wiltsey, we've got a large battle group 60 nautical miles to the northwest, heading in our direction. Seagoing radar has not identified, but we believe the battle group to be Japanese. The bridge personnel launched into action as the captain shouted, "Sound General Quarters! Alert Admiral Mullenix! They've probably got us pinged on their radar already. Let's pray to God we get our planes in the air before they do." Steaming toward American Task Force 52.13 was none other than the Japanese Imperial Navy's 5th Fleet 2nd Carrier Division, led by the now legendary Princeton-educated Japanese hero of Midway, Vice Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi. After that decisive naval triumph where he personally directed the destruction of American Carrier Task Force 16, consisting of the Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, he was elevated to Vice Admiral. He now commanded a much larger mobile naval attack force. While the expanded Japanese First Fleet patrolled the west coast of the United States, choking off any American rebuilding efforts, Yamaguchi's forces prowled the Central Pacific on search and destroy missions. Task Force 52.13, directly in their crosshairs, could not be in a worse spot in the entire ocean. Japanese Carrier Hiru. Vice Admiral Yamaguchi peered out past the flight deck from the bridge of the formidable carrier Hiru, his hands clasped behind his back. The Hiru was among the largest carriers afloat. Its displacement was 17,600 metric tons, nearly 10,000 metric tons larger than the Liscum Bay. Its length was over 746 feet, more than 200 feet longer than the Liscum. But its real superiority was its striking power. The Hiru carried 64 aircraft, a combination of Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. The Liscum carried just 28 planes, a combination of Wildcat fighters and Avenger torpedo bombers. Even with sister escort carriers Corregidor and Coral Sea carrying the same complement of planes, Liscum's battle group was no match for Yamaguchi's fast attack force. Sailing alongside the Hiru were sister carrier Soryu with 64 planes and the even larger fleet carrier Akagi. The Akagi, more than 855 feet long, carried 66 aircraft with another 25 in reserve. Admiral Yamaguchi, in dark navy blue battle uniform with lapels adorned by 2 embroidered gold stars, wore a gold braid over his left shoulder. His cap, also dark navy blue, was crowned by a center Japanese naval insignia. Small in stature but imposing in military bearing, Yamaguchi lived strictly by the Bushido Code, the traditional samurai code of honor that dictated men should behave according to an absolute moral standard, one that transcends logic. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. He was hot-tempered, aggressive to a fault, and a man who valued honor as the ultimate virtue. His decisive victory at Midway elevated him to godlike status among subordinates in the Imperial Japanese Navy. 10 silent naval officers and Hiryu's captain Tomeo Kaku surrounded the vice admiral on the bridge. All were surveying flight deck operations. How long till deployment, Captain Kaku? Yamaguchi asked in Japanese to the nearby officer. 10 minutes, Admiral. The enemy escort task force was identified only 5 minutes ago. Yamaguchi turned and glared at the captain, who reacted with an apologetic bow. Our first attack must overwhelm and render them impotent, unable to counterstrike. Yes, Admiral, Captain Kaku continued. In the first wave, as you ordered, we are launching 20 torpedo bombers, 6 fighter escorts, and 5 dive bombers. Soryu is launching the same configuration. I want to move up the launch of the second wave attack from Akaji to 10 minutes behind the first. I will make certain they receive the revised launch order, Admiral. Yamaguchi nodded as Kaku moved closer to him for a private conversation. Sir, about your orders to the bombers to avoid heavy damage to their carriers. Yes, Captain? Admiral, sir, it is simply our superior firepower could sink all 3 of their light carriers, destroying the heart of the battle group. Yamaguchi looked at him for a moment. Yes, Captain Kaku, what you say is entirely correct. Do not underestimate, however, the preference for death over dishonor to the Americans. They will surrender their carriers, and it will be a greater blow than if we had sent them all to the bottom of the sea. A phone rang near the back of the bridge. An officer picked up the shipboard telephone receiver, listened a moment, then shouted, First attack squadron ready to take off, Admiral. Yamaguchi barked, Launch all strike force aircraft. At that moment, more than 62 Japanese attack force planes began to launch from the decks of the Hiryu and Soryu. Wildcats and Avengers launched from the Liscum were already in the air. The planes on Corregidor, CVE 58, and Coral Sea, CVE 57, were 5 minutes behind them. Pilots of the American planes had no idea they were on a collision course with the overwhelming number of Yamaguchi's strike aircraft. The Wildcats flew above the low-flying Avenger torpedo bombers, providing a screen. Wildcat lead pilot Tug Sunderland, 20 years old, former crop duster out of Topeka, Kansas, spotted numerous black dots at 10 o'clock, silhouetted against the northwestern clouds 10 minutes into his sortie from Liscum. Jesus, he said, immediately realizing his force was outnumbered at least 2 to 1. Sunderland knew his squad's only chance was to employ the Wildcats' best fighting tactic against the more agile Zeros, attack them head-on. The Wildcat, heavier and less maneuverable than the Japanese Zero, had 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber machine guns which could deliver 200 rounds in a 4-second burst. The 5,500-pound Zero, faster and lighter than the Wildcat, had 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons. Its vulnerability was its 3-wing and fuselage fuel tanks and its unprotected glass pilot canopy. Sunderland, knowing his squad had lost the element of surprise, readied for a slugfest. Attacking head-on into the Japanese squadron at 600 miles per hour would be a high-stakes game of chicken, with no one wanting to flinch. Squadron leader to base, numerous enemy aircraft inbound. We're gonna need some help up here. On the flagship, Admiral Mullenix had already ordered all perimeter ships, as well as the 3 carriers, to man their Bofors 40mm and Oerlikon 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Every available man was on the line. Pilot Sunderland had radioed his squad the attack plan, and all planes bore down head-on for the kill. As the American pilots made their move, the Zeros broke off as expected into steep climbing maneuvers to get above the American formation. Sunderland and his squad opened up their 50-caliber wing machine guns. Sunderland shattered the right wing of one of the evading Zeros. His bullets burst the interior fuel tank of the Zero, and the entire plane blew up in a blinding white flash. Sunderland shielded his eyes a moment, then saw debris careening past his canopy, including the Zero's engine, which was still spinning and turning. Smaller pieces of debris bounced off his prop and right wing, but his Wildcat remained flyable. Fellow pilots had similar, albeit less spectacular, kills on the exposed underbelly of other Zeros, sending them crashing into the sea. With the Wildcats engaged, the Avengers had lost their fighter screen. Even still, they doggedly continued forward, battling through the remaining Japanese planes. If they could reach the enemy task force, their deadly accurate 2,216-pound Mark 13 torpedo bombs could wreak considerable havoc. 8 Avengers were able to squeeze past the first Japanese formation, but 6 miles distant from the Hiru, they slammed head-on into the second overwhelming wave of escort fighter Zeros, which had just lifted off from the Akagi. The American pilots had no chance. 2 and 3 Zeros simultaneously attacked each Avenger in an epic mismatch that destroyed all 8 remaining bombers in less than 7 minutes. There were no American survivors. With Sunderland's squadron tied up in aerial combat, this unfortunately allowed a great number of Japanese torpedo and dive bombers to slip past and bear down on the American task group. Their overwhelming numbers simply could not be stopped. USS Mississippi. On the only battleship left in Task Force 52.13, Mississippi gunner Patrick "Patty" Murphy, 19, former altar boy and only son of Fiona and Sean of South Boston, Massachusetts, agonized. His finger twitched on the trigger. This was his first naval battle, and his shirt was already soaked through with sweat. As his body trembled, he whispered a silent prayer as he readied for the onslaught of enemy bombers. Alarms rang out from all ships in the battle group. This would be close-in fighting. The ship's big guns would be ineffective for anti-aircraft combat, as they were designed to hurl projectiles at enemy ships 20 miles away. Admiral Yamaguchi's fleet steered clear of their range, circling the American task force at 50 nautical miles. A lookout on the Mississippi shouted, "They're coming in low!" Then Murphy saw them. It was a formation of 10 B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, scraping the surface of the waves 3 miles out, coming in low and slow directly at him. Murphy could see they had their landing gear down and flaps up. This was a Japanese tactic for more precise targeting. Murphy, along with a line of other gunners on the starboard side, unleashed an intense wall of AA fire into the attackers. The noise was deafening. 5 of the Kates instantly peeled off to the east, maintaining low altitude, while the other 5 dropped their payloads and climbed skyward. At 05:21 hours, 5 2,000-pound torpedo bombs slammed into the starboard side of the USS Mississippi. 1 would have been sufficient to neutralize her. 5 spread carnage on a scale rivaling the explosions on the West Virginia, sunk by 9 torpedoes at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Mutilated, blackened bodies were blown 1,500 yards from the ship into flaming oil slicks in the sea as the 10,000 pounds of torpedo bombs detonated in sickening succession. The last image Murphy witnessed before his incineration was the red tip of the Mark 91 torpedo slamming into the side of the ship 30 feet below his 20-millimeter gun. Watching the exploding Mississippi from the bridge of the Liscum, Mullenix, anguished, had to look away. The battleship became completely engulfed in a white and orange fireball. No outline of the ship remained visible. The raging inferno of twisted iron and molten metal sank beneath the waves in under 2 minutes. The admiral shouted to the communications officer, "Any word from our squadron?" Negative, Admiral. We lost radio contact with Commander Sunderland 5 minutes ago. What about our torpedo bombers? Not a word, sir. Mullenix slammed his hand down on the map table as the battle continued to rage around him. Ship-to-ship radio transmissions conveyed the desperation. Shouts, screams, and explosions pierced the air. Hundreds of men were dying horrible deaths all around him. Turning to the west from the bridge, Mullenix could see the twisted heap of the disabled cruiser Baltimore burning and sinking stern first. Only its bow number 68 remained above water. The ship had taken 3 direct torpedo hits in its bomb bay from the Cates. Coral Sea's gunners destroyed 2 of the swooping dive bombers. One, skidding across the carrier's deck in flames, took out 2 of their reserve Wildcat fighters, and all 3 aircraft tumbled into the sea. As Mullenix watched the Baltimore's bow number finally slip below the sea, a second formidable wave of enemy planes arrived. 21 devastating Japanese Val D-3A dive bombers, each fitted with a single 500-pound bomb, filled the sky. At this point in the Pacific War, the Vals had sunk more Allied warships than any other Axis aircraft, and now they were zeroing in on the American Task Force's Gridley-class destroyer USS Maury. The ship had been fitted with radar fire control 2 years earlier. Vals, pounded left and right, were burning and crashing into the sea, but the number of enemy aircraft was simply too great. 3 D-3As were able to slip past the Maury's radar-accurate guns to drop 3 500-pound bombs dead center on her deck. She blew up in a blinding flash, causing Mullenix and the other officers on the Liscombe Bridge to shield their eyes. When he pulled his hand away from his eyes, the Admiral took in the burning wreckage surrounding his flagship. He quickly determined that none of the carriers had been hit, with the exception of the Coral Sea, where the burning Japanese torpedo bomber had slid across her flight deck. In the sudden momentary lull in the battle, Mullenix shouted to his communications officer, "Any word yet from Pacific Command?" "Yes, sir. They are just sending the secure orders in now." Mullenix frowned at the officer. He knew this was bad. "I'll take them in my ready room," he said, and quickly exited the bridge. The Admiral stood silent in his ready room, staring at the task force's new orders, feeling equal parts relief and disbelief. The order had been transmitted via a secure channel and approved by President Wilkie himself. Preserve life, stand down, surrender, cease all hostile action against the enemy. Mullenix had to act fast if he was going to preserve remaining sailor lives. He raced to the ship's radio room and directed the radio operator to hail the commander of the Japanese Armada. The battle was over. The American battle group drifted dead in the water, the guns of the remaining ships left afloat silenced, and their crews taken offline. Liscombe Bay floated as cold iron at the center of what was left of the task force, sister carriers Corregidor and Coral Sea, and the destroyers Hull, Franks, Hughes, and Hull. The ships were quiet, with the majority of the crews on all ships confined to quarters as the special surrender detail assembled on the Liscombe. No sailor could recall in any modern war when an American carrier had ever prepared for the humiliating ritual of being boarded. But it was happening, and the Japanese admiral was expected within the hour. Admiral Mullenix, his uniform disheveled from the battle, stewed in his ready room. How had it come to this, he wondered? How had a once proud country and her naval fortunes turned so dark that he had been ordered to surrender an entire seagoing task force to the enemy? He felt he had awakened in a horrible nightmare. He longed for his past. Hell, he even preferred his own denied death in the other world to this. At least he had gone down fighting. The phone on his desk rang. He knew it would be to alert him that the Japanese admiral was approaching. He picked up the receiver. "Mullenix?" "Yeah, right. I'll be on deck in 10 minutes." He returned the receiver to the hook slowly. He wondered what the surrender terms would be, though he was in no position to bargain. He knew the Imperial Japanese Navy to be ruthless. They were fanatics. He closed his eyes and silently prayed for mercy, not for himself, but for his crew and the task force. There was great pain and suffering ahead. He could feel it in his war-weary bones. A tangible harshness permeated the air, mingled with a bleak emptiness. His brain finally recognized what the empty feeling was: defeat. USS Liscum Bay, flight deck. The special detail of 20 officers assembled with both the naval colors and the American flag folded and cased by the honor guard. The majority of the other officers secured themselves below deck. Mullenix sought to spare his men the humiliation and indignity of this particular wartime ceremony. Joe Rusk, however, had found his way topside and hid back behind a bulkhead near the No. 2 gun. He had to see this unfold with his own eyes. All was silent except for the waves crashing softly against the hull and the curious whistling of the wind through the wires on the conning tower. As Joe listened to this sound, he looked skyward. He had never heard this eerie whistling before. It was a beseeching moan, as if the ship itself was wailing for her crew. This sound made Joe's blood run cold. Suddenly, off the bow, Japanese Zeros appeared in a squadron of 6. They buzzed, then circled the carrier in a show of unneeded enemy intimidation. Off the port side, the diesel sputter of the Japanese transport vessel made all heads turn as the enemy ship drew near. Another sailor detail waited at the rails to direct the vessel into position alongside the carrier. Mullenix emerged on deck in formal white dress uniform, taking his place opposite the bridge. He watched the Japanese ensigns emerge from their climb up the shipside ladder onto the flight deck. They were the advance team to make certain the area was secure. The ensigns carried carbines and motioned American sailors to step back to make room. 2 Japanese officers followed the security detail. Mullenix figured these were the captain of the admiral's flagship and his first officer. They approached Mullenix and saluted with a slight bow of their bodies. They took their places off to the right, then stood rigid, eyes unblinking. Finally, Vice Admiral Yamaguchi emerged onto the flight deck. He was dressed for the occasion in formal Japanese white dress uniform with ribbons adorning the left breast. The jacket had shoulder boards with 2 gold stars embroidered on each. His cap was also white with a black band and center gold-embroidered naval insignia. Yamaguchi's walk was purposeful and confident. He was all business. As the Vice Admiral reached Mullenix, he snapped and held a crisp salute. Mullenix returned it begrudgingly. "Admiral, I am Vice Admiral Yamaguchi of 5th Fleet," he said in his perfect Princeton-educated accent. "I will now accept your unconditional surrender." "Unconditional?" Mullenix protested. "We are not going to discuss terms?" "There are no terms to discuss unless you wish the annihilation of your remaining battle group." Joe, still hiding near the No. 2 gun and hearing the whole exchange, sunk into depression. Events had progressed way beyond hopeless. Joe knew becoming a prisoner of the fanatical Japanese was a certain death sentence. Mullenix looked down, still not believing he was about to hand over his remaining ships and more than 5,000 men to become prisoners of the enemy. "What's going to happen to my crew?" You and your crew will be escorted to our detention center at Pearl Harbor. I can give you no further information. And my ships? The ones not at the bottom of the ocean will be added to the roster of our first fleet. Mullenix paused a moment, barely containing his rage. Then, in a booming voice, shouted, "Lieutenant!" A bewildered young lieutenant 10 yards to his rear replied from next to the honor guard, "Yes, sir." "Initiate the transfer." Mullenix stepped back into line with his men and allowed the color guard led by the lieutenant to move forward toward the Japanese vice admiral. Surprise and anger swept over Yamaguchi's face as he turned and glared at Mullenix. A vice admiral does not accept surrender from a lieutenant. Yamaguchi called back to an officer in Japanese, "Lieutenant, forward! The dishonor on this day will not be mine. Accept the flag of the defeated Americans." An equally young Japanese lieutenant came forward. Yamaguchi glared at Mullenix a final time, then turned and stormed back toward his escort vessel. Mullenix, seething with contempt, watched him leave and grumbled, "Jap son of a bitch." Yamaguchi, within earshot, froze mid-step. He returned and faced Mullenix. "You have heard of the conditions within our prisoner of war camps, Admiral, yes?" Mullenix nodded. "The rumors of horrors are not fabrications, I can assure you." Then the Japanese admiral shifted his gaze to the assembled American sailors and shouted so all could hear, "In fact, I would be very surprised to learn if you or any of your crew survive the month." Yamaguchi nodded to Mullenix, then turned briskly and resumed his exit from the captured Liscum Bay.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Ghost Carrier, our 15-part alternative history series. Join us next time for another installment. This story has been adapted from my book, Ghost Carrier. You can purchase the full version in paperback, Kindle, or audiobook from the links in this episode's description. And if you like what you hear, leave a review or a rating, or just click the follow button. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Ghost Carrier, only on Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.